Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls. We are live back in the studio in the Lion's Den once again with my good friend, Stefan Patsis. How you feeling, brother?
Dude, I feel great. I am so excited to dive into chapter 1 of Judges and get this Devo rolling.
Yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your hype level at?
Honestly, my hype level is 10. I'm super excited about this, and I feel like God has been speaking to me big time, and I'm excited to get rolling and to hear what you guys have to say about it, and let's get this conversation rolling.
Crazy, bro. Let's do this. All right, we're starting off this series. We talked about it a little bit in our last episode. We're going into the book of Judges. What the heck is Judges? What's going on in this book?
Yeah, so we start off in the very beginning of Judges. So Israel, this nation that God has chosen through Abraham to be his people, they've been in captivity. They've been in Egypt for 400 years, and God frees them with this man named Moses. And Moses, he brings them into the desert, and they get the 10 Commandments. God's speaking to them. God's moving with them. And after 2 years, they finally are about to go into the promised land. And the people are afraid. They look at the Canaanites, they look at the people in the promised land, and they go, man, these people are huge. We cannot beat them in war, even though they were afraid of them. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, then God is upset that they didn't partake in this promise that he had for them. And he makes them wander the desert again for 38 more years. So it's a total of 40 years that they're wandering the desert. And Moses eventually, he passes away, he dies. And Moses' next person in line is Joshua. And now Joshua's taking the reins, and he's leading the people. And right now we're seeing the very tail end of those 40 years, and they're about to go into the promised land. They're about to start fighting wars and fighting battles, and they're about to go into the place that God had intended for them to live all this time. But they've been slaves, and they've been fearful, and they haven't been faithful. And now they kind of have this fake confidence about them. And they're going into the promised land, and where we see just right off the gate in chapter 1, they're already making mistakes. Like they're supposed to be living the high life. They're supposed to be living exactly what God has intended them to be, and they barely like they're kind of doing it. Kind of.
It's so anticlimactic.
I know. It's like, gosh, you had so many opportunities to win at life and you didn't.
Story of my life.
Yeah, story. So, dude, Remy, reading this chapter, was there anything that you took away from it? Anything that stuck out to you? Any verses?
Nope.
Get out of here. Get out of here. There had to have been. It was rich.
This is loaded. This is loaded with stuff. Before I even jump into that, do you want to just give like an overview of what like chapter 1 looks like for us? Like what's kind of happening in this chapter 1?
Yeah. So chapter 1, the different tribes of Israel, they start to take the land that was sectioned out for them. So they had these different areas and these different territories that they were supposed to live in and take over. And so they're kind of going into these lands, and you see that a lot of these tribes, they go in and they start to fight these wars, and God says to completely cast out and to get rid of the people that are the inhabitants.
Yep.
The people who are living there.
The residents.
He says, get rid of them. Like, don't cohabitate with these people. And you see that they cohabitate. Like, they go into the land, and there's even a tribe, Dan. They don't even get to be a part of the land. They actually get pushed back by the people that are living in the land that Dan is supposed to live in, and they get pushed back, and they end up living in a cave. Like, they don't even get to partake in the land that they're supposed to be living in. And so the story of chapter 1 just kind of sets us up for this. Like, you've been reading for a long time. You get through Joshua where it's like, be courageous, be strong and courageous. And then they get there and they're not.
Yeah.
And so in chapter 1, it kind of just sets you up for this, like, hey, we failed. Like, they failed. And now you're going to read this book of all these people that God is trying to bring up to get these failure of people to like get into the right way.
Yeah.
And so it's just this setup of like, they were supposed to do this and they didn't.
Yeah.
It's just this sad intro.
Yeah. Well, even to add on top of that too, it looks like the first couple of crusades, so to say, end successfully. But then you just see this like snowball effect going downhill of every other tribe basically failing to completely wipe out and to push out the people in those cities. And then by the end of it, you're like, all right, well, it looks like everybody is in oppression, which is depressing. So yeah, not a great start. Not like your happy beginnings of like every movie you watch where like things seem to be okay. Except for Avengers Endgame. That starts off pretty bad.
Yes.
So, yeah, dude, it's got so much in here. The first thing that came to mind as I was reading through this was, we see the king right off the bat, Adonai, I don't know how to pronounce it, Adonai Bezek. He fled, but he was caught. It says that they caught him and that they captured him, and it said that they cut off his thumbs and his big toes, and immediately had empathy because I realized, like, if I didn't have thumbs, bro, I couldn't text anymore. Like, that's over.
That's what you thought about texting?
Bro, that's
dude, I'm thinking about like driving. Think about how awkward, like you'd be just straight palming it. Have you ever been driving with your palm and like your hand slips and you're like, oh gosh.
Yeah, I can see that. My car also drives itself, so I don't use it. I'm just kidding. No, I would actually hate my big toes being gone. I don't think we realize how valuable a big toe is. So let's just take a moment to rest in the presence of the value of big toes.
Rest in peace.
No, why? Okay, so why the following verse says that he said 70 kings with their thumbs and toes. He did the same thing to them. But I mean, why the thumbs and toes? What significance is there with that? That's such a weird thing to do. Like I've seen in like movies before. I don't know if you've seen the Hunger Games, but they cut off the tongues of people in that are servants, so they can't talk anymore. And I believe it's usually people that rose up against the I don't know what the name is of their. It's been so long. Anyways, just against the kingdom and the empire. And so if they speak up against it, then they cut their tongues off, showing them a lesson of like, this is what happens when you speak against this. So like, I get that, but why thumbs and toes? What do those do?
Well, if you think about it, like you just talked about it, there's so many little things that you can't do without your thumbs and big toes. Like you can't jump. You don't have stability when you're running at all. You can't grip a sword. So back in the day, like your thumbs and big toes was a big deal.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing when you have a king that you fought in war, you've conquered them, you cut off their thumbs and big toes. Basically what you're telling them is you're not a king anymore because kings would lead the charge. Like if you look at David, what happened when David was sinning and he had Bathsheba, he wasn't being the king.
Right.
He wasn't at war with his people leading the charge. And so like basically you're neutering any sort of significance and title from this person who was a king.
That's tough. Because it says that he had to, like, I think he walked the rest of his life not having his thumbs and his big toes, which basically just shows that he's like walking in shame for the rest of his life. But that following verse says that 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. So, I mean, right off the bat, I'm thinking, what you do to others will always come back around. But it also makes me think of like the Proverbs and how the Proverbs say a lot of things, but then you read like Ecclesiastes and you realize that it's not always as black and white as that goes. But that makes me think about things like karma, because we talk about that term a lot, like, oh, like what comes around goes around. Like if you do this to someone, it's going to come back on you. And so my first question is does karma actually exist as far as like, I guess there's two different types of karma. The way that like the world understands it out of context is that like what you do comes around to you. But like in traditional Hinduism, karma has to do with like reincarnation and like how you come into the next life. But this idea of like what comes around goes around, is that like biblically true that like what I do is going to eventually come back around to me?
100%. And I think karma in the sense of how the world views karma.
Yeah.
I don't think that's accurate. Like, I don't think if I'm nice to a bunch of people, like people are going to be nice to me. I think karma in the sense that God sees everything. He sees our heart. He sees our intention. And so like Jesus talks about this. If you're going to pray do it in your home, in private, because like you want to be sincere and have a relationship with God, and like it's genuine. But if you do it in public for the world to see, like you got your reward, you got praise. Like, dude, that dude's spiritual. Like that's it. That's where it is. Yeah. And so I think the karma comes into like the intentionality of your heart and like how you truly, like, are you being kind to others because you want to have kindness in return, or are you being kind to others because you received the kindness of Jesus Christ and like you've been renewed? And like if you've been renewed and you're being kind to others, you're free from being repaid of like, what? I was nice to you. I gave you $10 and now I need $10 and you're not giving it to me. Like that's like, it's not the same.
Right.
And so I think karma in the sense of like God sees you and your heart and the intentions of your heart, and he blesses you.
Yeah.
Like he sees you and he cares for you like a loving father. Like I believe in that.
Totally. What about the idea of like what you reap, you sow eventually? We see it in scripture, right? I believe it's Galatians 6, chapter 6, verses 7 through 9, which talks about like a man reaps what he sows. So like, I mean, if you're living a sinful life, is that eventually going to come and bite you in the end? Or is like, cause I feel like I've seen people all the time that like do wrong in this world and they get away with it. Like I thought that God was like a God of justice. Like I thought that he like brings justice to those who do wrong things. You know what I'm saying? So like when I see a verse like this, like I get excited that this guy who's been doing this, literally enslaving people and cutting people's toes off, like he's getting what he deserves. But like that doesn't always end up happening that way with things in this world. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I feel like this is a bigger debate. It's like a huge topic of discussion. But I remember sitting down with a high school student who was like, man, this guy, he gets all the girls. I get no girls. I'm like sitting there like, man, you're so shallow. But I remember telling him like, God allows you in this earthly life, kind of have what you want.
Yeah.
Like, if you want likes on Instagram, like you can find ways to get likes on Instagram, but we have a perverted version of justice. Yeah. And so like, for instance, someone has cancer. Okay. Yeah. What we think is just is like that person needs to be healed right now today. And some people die of sickness. They do. Like that's just this world we live in. There's sin, there's chaos, there's sickness going on. And like that's what's so great about heaven is like there's not going to be any of that. Like think about a world where everybody's helping each other because no one's prideful. Like everybody just wants to help. Like that's crazy to think about.
Right.
So, but like what if God in his infinite wisdom and justice, like allowing someone to pass away, like isn't that the ultimate healing? Because now they're in heaven where they aren't sick anymore. They don't have the repercussions of chemo. They don't have all this different stuff that they have to still live with. They're now in the presence of God. And they had their ultimate healing. They're now with Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And so it's like we have this, like, that guy, he's corrupt and he owns $1 billion business. Like, why doesn't all the money get swiped from him and now there's no more poverty? Like, I think that we have this perverted version in our minds of what should happen.
Yeah.
And we have to remember God is so good.
Yeah.
And we don't know everything. We just don't. We don't know everything.
Yeah. Which is true. And I think that at the end of the day, way bigger discussion, because there are going to be so many other scenarios where you do want someone to like seek justice for something happening and it might not happen. But like at the end, we have to remember that ultimate judgment will come. But again, we go back to our perverted views where we want things and outcomes to happen a certain way, but we don't judge the heart like God judges the heart. God sees beyond what we can see. And so when we believe that a certain outcome is going to happen and something different happens as far as like how God decides to judge someone for something, like we think that we're the ones in the right when we're nowhere near close to what like God's perfect judgment looks like. So it's huge. But that was just the first thing that came to my mind. And that was only a few verses in. I mean, this thing's got so much going on here. What did you read next? What did you see out of this coming into the next?
Just kind of going on with that same thing about sin and like reaping what you sow. So bear with me. There's going to be a point to this. I'm going to read this passage here. It's in verse 22. So the house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph scouted out Bethel. Now the name of the city was formerly Luz. And the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, "Please show us the way into the city, and we will deal kindly with you." And he showed them the way into the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword. So this is kind of a crazy thing. So when you read the text, what it sounds like is they watch this man come out of the city, and then they say, "Show us the way into the city," which is kind of stupid because they literally just watched him come out of the city, right? So back in the day, these old towns, what they would do, these old cities, is they would find a water source. They would find a well. And then they would build these, like, not secret passages, but like these other ways, these routes out of the city. And then they would build a big outer wall around it. Mm-hmm. So there was always like another entrance. Like there's the main source, the water source, and they would build protection around that because like if like another city poisoned the well, like they're screwed. So,
but they wouldn't draw attention to it. They would beautify the main gate and make that look like that's the main way into it.
Exactly. So what they're doing is they're asking, "Hey, where's the entrance to the city? Where is the main source? Like if we cut this off, we have the whole city captured."
Yeah.
And I was just thinking in our own life, there is a main source to all of our sin. Like there's a main source, and it's always stemmed from a heart issue. It always is. And I think we spend a lot of our time and energy attacking the outer gates, the main fence, the main wall. And I'll give an example. Like people will talk about how, oh man, if you're struggling with a porn addiction, what you need to do is you need to download an app on your phone that tracks where you're going. So like that helps prevent it. But that doesn't fix the heart issue.
Yeah.
Like why do you feel like you need to go to porn for satisfaction?
Right.
Why do you feel like that's something that you need in your life to feel comfort and reassurance? And an app to track what websites you're on, that like doesn't help. Same thing like jealousy. We say like delete Instagram. Like if you're jealous looking at somebody else's photos, delete Instagram. Yes, like that's going to help for a time, but that's not the main source of why you're jealous.
Yeah.
Like that's not the main problem that's going on in your life. And so I was just kind of self-reflecting and thinking, man, am I wasting my time and energy on outer things? And am I really letting Jesus Christ penetrate all the way to the deepest parts of my soul, my heart, and really hit this? Because he says we're free.
Right.
We are free. Not partially free, not like, oh, I'm gonna sin sometimes and some like I'm gonna always battle with this. No, we're free in Christ Jesus. Christ Jesus makes us complete and whole in Him. And so I was just thinking, man, do I truly believe that I'm free from this sin, and am I allowing Jesus Christ to come to to the main source and strip me of that sin?
Yeah. Have you ever had weeds in your yard before?
Yes, of course, dude.
Yes.
I'm like kind of embarrassed because I've got towers.
That question went. He was not ready.
Dude, I just I felt so bad for my wife just now.
Well, anyways, it makes me think of that because this past winter I was not very good at taking care of my yard. I'm gonna be super honest with you right now. The whole like Home Depot dad side of me, it didn't come out till like a few weeks ago. It was bad. But there was a bunch of like weeds that started growing in like the middle of the lawn, like in the grass, like not like on the outskirts, which usually is what happens. Like it's growing like in the grass, like it's infested within the roots of everything else. And so I had like one day I was like going to, mow the lawn, and I was like, I should probably pull these out before I mow so they don't come back. And I start going to the weeds to try and pull them out, and I'm tugging like with everything that I got. I'm trying to pull these suckers out. These guys are big too. And I'm pulling like with all my strength, all my tiny mustard strength that I have. And I'm pulling, and all of a sudden rip, and like just the top stem of like the weed comes off. And then the bottom half is still stuck in there.
Yeah.
And I struggled so hard, and I couldn't even get half of them out. Like I'm trying to like dig around it. And I'm like, at this point, I'm destroying the grass around this thing. I can't get to the root. And I just thought to myself, if I would have gotten to this thing sooner, it would have been so easy to pull this out. But because I let it fester and sit and grow a deeper root, now I'm having a really hard time finding a way to get it out. But I also am going after the branches of it. I'm not going after the root of it. I think that we a lot of times think about weeds and we think about, oh, if I cut off this part of the weed, then it's done. Like, then this is not here anymore. Oh, I'm gonna cut off this side. Oh, I'm gonna trim the whole thing. I'm just gonna go ahead and just trim it all up. And it's just gonna have the one root sticking all the way out. And we think that the weed doesn't exist anymore. But like ultimately, like if you want to pull that weed out and you don't want it to grow back, you have to pull it from the roots. Otherwise, it's gonna not only stay there, but it's gonna start to spread. And so I had weeds all over the backyard that were growing because I let that one weed grow in the first place. And like in the same sense, like with sin, like your smile on your face, bro. Like in the same way with sin, like if we don't like cut it out at the root as soon as we see it there, like it's gonna fester, it's gonna grow, and it's gonna spread and influence into other areas of our lives.
That is so good. I love that. And I'm smiling because those of you that are listening to this podcast don't know, like we have brought stuff to the table of like what we're going to talk about, but like, it's just so cool to know like the Holy Spirit is constantly working in us. And like, that's not something that we prepared. And Jeremy's like, bring that out. It's just like, I'm smiling because it's so happy. Like it makes me happy to know like God speaks and like, you got to listen to him and he's telling us things and he's writing me. So like, anyways, him saying that just reminds me of my own life. Like I can't be passive. You can't be passive. You can't wait until Home Depot dad comes out of you. Like you got to be on top of it and you got to be on your A game always. Yeah. Like you can't allow yourself to go through a season of being passive in your faith. So
yeah, dude, that's so good. All right, we're jumping to the next part of this. This takeaway, this one got me hyped, dude. It's kind of along the same routes of what we were just kind of talking about. But if you read a little bit farther into the text, you get to, I mean, it's pretty repetitive in what they say, but I'm just going to read, for example, verses 33. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh or the inhabitants of Beth Anath. So they lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath became subject to forced labor for them. So you see this with like each of the tribes. So instead of them fully driving out the Canaanites or the specific tribes within the Canaanites, not fully driving them out, they leave some of them there. They compromise, but in one sense, they feel like because they've compromised, they can justify it because, but we've controlled them. We've put them into forced labor. We've, made sure that they don't have the same freedoms that they used to have. Like, we got this under control. And I mean, you read a little bit later and you get a spoiler alert, like they become oppressed and they get taken over by them again and again and again. And we're going to see that story all throughout the Judges. And it just made me think, like, there are so many times in my life when I tried to convince myself that like I had my temptations under control, that like I was like, okay, I'm not completely wiping these temptations out of my life, these areas and these roots. Kind of going to that idea that you talked about with like, you can get the app, you can get the, the 10-step program things, and you can use those things to prevent yourself. Mm-hmm. And like, that doesn't deal with the root, but I think that there is beauty in both sides of that coin but taking action steps to do what you can to get those out of there while still recognizing the heart issue. It's like, well, if you keep watching like really inappropriate movies, you should probably stop watching inappropriate movies while you work on like growing closer to Jesus too. But I just thought all the time that I'm like, I got my temptations under control. Like, I'm in the Word, I'm reading every morning, I'm praying every day. Like, I got this thing. And over and over and over and over again, I'd fall into temptation.
Well, it's so funny you kind of bring this up because being a youth leader, I've kind of found a common theme on this. Someone will download the app on their phone, right? Mm-hmm. But they don't have it on their computer. So it's like, oh yeah, I'm totally in control. It's kind of like we trick ourselves because I am in control here. Yeah. This sin over here doesn't count because I do have control. Like I could be in control if I wanted. Like I don't watch it on my phone anymore. Yeah. But I watch it over here. Same thing. Like I deleted Instagram from my phone, but I can go on the internet and look at Instagram. Bro. It's like I don't have the app, but I can check when I want. And I think that if we're really honest with ourselves, you're actually never in control of your sin, ever. It's all a lie. And I think that's something that people really need to like come to grips with. And like we talked about this earlier, it's a heart issue. Yeah. It's something so much deeper than an app. It's something so much like this is temptation that like the Bible talks about this, your temptations, someone in the history somewhere has dealt with something you've dealt with before. Yeah. And 400 years ago, they did not have Instagram, but they had jealousy.
Yeah.
And they had comparison issues, and they had lust. And I think that's something that we kind of forget is like these stories, like that's why we're going through Judges, is even though it's way back in the day and there's like these crazy things that happen, like it's kind of the same.
Yeah.
It's the same. And
100%.
Gosh, I love the word.
So yeah, just to kind of like wrap that point up, like don't compromise with sin in your life. Like if the Lord is calling you to get rid of sin in your life and to step away from whatever that is, whether it be your insecurities, whether it be jealousy, whether it be anger, hatred, gossiping, slander, whether it be like lust, those kind of things. Like if God like clearly does through scripture calls us out on those things to step away from them, like do not compromise with those sins. Do not try to find a way to justify living with it and think that you have it under control or that it's somehow still okay. Because you might think you have it under control, but it's only a matter of time until it takes control of you. So you got to get it out of there. Don't compromise on those things. But now I just kind of want to lead this into the next question, because this one's kind of like, I've been wrestling with this one. So you see that, you know, God calls the Israelites to like wipe out these nations, like straight up, like kill them, right? And most people have this idea that the God of the Old Testament is this vengeful God of wrath that's all about like killing and genocide and slavery and all these things. And I can't get away from people that keep talking about that. I swear every single time. Like I was watching a video the other day and like this guy was explaining the difference between like in a movie, the themes of like pure like vengeance and war and wrath, and then like peace and love and kindness and those things. And they were like, it's kind of like the New Testament and the Old Testament. And it's like, it's everywhere. But the point is that like I read this text and it looks like God is calling them to like straight up wipe these people out. And like, is that like a God of love to like wipe people out like that? I don't know. Like, I feel like from growing up in the Christian home and all these things, like I've been told to turn the other cheek for my enemies. So when I see God giving a command for the Israelites to like wipe out these nations, I mean, like, am I getting a takeaway that I'm allowed to go do those to like those around me? Like, does this mean that, you know, if I see Hollywood, like bringing in like the kind of influence that they have, that's ruining the next generation for whatever innocence they have, like, am I allowed to go and wipe out Hollywood and Disney and like take these like conglomerates out because it's going to do better for the world? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm trying to wrestle with these thoughts. Does that kind of make sense? I'm just trying to figure out how to navigate like it's a pretty loaded topic and question, but I don't know. What do you get from that?
So I'm going to try to navigate this, because that is a loaded question, and you're going off script, Remy. I'm kidding. So, you know, we forget that God is just, and I'm gonna say the takeaway and then kind of explain myself after. But we forget that God's justice is actually merciful, and so I'll give you an example later on, like way more into the Bible. So when we're talking about Samuel, there's a story where God tells Saul to wipe out this group of people, and later on, so Saul doesn't do it, and later on, the descendants of that people end up starting to create a mass genocide, and the concept of this story is God saw the future. God saw the future and knew that if that people were around, it would cause more problems than to end it today.
Yeah.
And I do think that we need to have a voice as Christians. Like, you kind of brought this up earlier, not in the podcast, but with me, that there's like this TV show that's kind of like allowing pedophilia. Like, it's like kind of allowing this concept, like, no, we shouldn't allow that. Yeah. That's not cool. But I don't think that we're called to kill people.
Okay, good.
I don't think that we're called to wipe people out. I think this kind of brings up this subject kind of brings up a question about like cohabitating with people that aren't believers. So like, we talk about this all the time. We're called to love, and we're called to be evangelistic to others.
Right.
And so we look at this text right now, and it's like God's telling them to push out these tribes from this land and to not even live with them. Like, that's kind of crazy. We're called to live with people that are not believers so that they can see Jesus Christ. Like, how do we balance that?
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
so I think I know this couple, and they're married, and the wife, she went out and she went on a girls' trip. And on this girls' trip, she was getting hit on by this guy at the bar. And the friends kind of encouraged her to, like, yeah, keep going. Like, it's fun. He's buying you drinks, all this stuff. But eventually, like, the friends left and she stayed back. And eventually she had an affair with this guy. And those friends, friends aren't people that a Christian person should be around. Like, she's a married woman. They're not leading her down a path of righteousness, and they're not encouraging her to be the best self, the best version of herself. And I'm gonna tailor that to another point. So I know this person that's right now, she's hanging out with somebody that's not Christian. And this person's calling her for advice, and she's asking her about life stuff. She doesn't go to church at all, but this friend does go to church, and she's been answering her questions, and she's been hanging out with her a ton. And maybe she's not dropping Jesus in every single conversation and verses, but she's being extremely intentional in the relationship that she has. And I think that's what God is saying in this text is He knew, kind of going back to that judgment and like knowing, He knew that the Jews weren't going to be intentional, that they were going to cohabitate, and that they were eventually going to worship the gods of these people if they stayed in that land with them, and that they were eventually going to fall away, which they did, and they were going to be oppressed, which they were. And I think God here, it was an act of mercy. Like, it's going to be better off for you to not be together with these people.
Yeah.
But I do think that we have something they don't. We have the Holy Spirit. And we have Jesus Christ, and we are forgiven, and we are redeemed, and we live set apart. And when you're pursuing Jesus Christ, and when you're pursuing God in relationship, He renews you, and you're able to be evangelistic towards people. But if you're hanging out with a friend, and every single time you hang out with them, you're getting drunk and you're making bad decisions, are you truly loving that person? Because you're telling them, like, these behaviors are totally okay, and these bad decisions and the way that I talk is the exact same as you. So why would they want your God?
Yeah.
If what you do is exactly what they do. And that's probably better for you to stop hanging out with that friend. It's actually probably better for them too, because then they can find someone who is showing them the light of Jesus Christ. And they will find Jesus through that other person if you're not being that for them.
Yeah. I still wrestle with the idea of I don't want to say like abandoning, but like, I don't know. It feels like you have to be like nice to everybody these days, and like to all of a sudden just cut people out of your life. On the one side, I see a lot out there on social media, people being like, cut out the people that are bad for you in your life. And like, they're just like, only surround yourself by like good people and stuff. And so I wouldn't say that the world's on that side of, don't do those things. I think that they might side more with what we're talking about, but at the same time, like, is that the most like loving? I feel like that's not the most loving thing to do, is to like leave that friend if like they like aren't a believer and you are a believer, and you're trying to make an influence in them, but you're spending like all your time with them.
Dude, yeah, I think this takes prayer, and this takes you really knowing the source. Like we talked about this earlier. Yeah. Like if you have a friend that influences you more than you influence them, you need to be wise. Yeah. Like, yes, we are called to love, but you also have a faith walk. So I know this guy, he is a new believer, and he's been dating some girls, and he didn't know Christ until recently. And he's not dating everybody now. Like some girls have been a temptation to him because they don't have that same moral standard of a Christian. And he's realizing, like, if I just date somebody who is okay with having sex on the first date, like that's going to trip me up. Yeah. Like I need to be smart with that. And so it's interesting. Like we understand that concept in like dating. Like you shouldn't be dating someone who's going to do that. But like, why don't we have that same understanding in friendships too? Yeah. Like there are going to be unbelievers that encourage you, like in a positive way, and that you can influence for the good. And there are people that, like, let's just be real. There are people that want to see you fail. There are people that want to see you sin. And you need to just be wise on that. Like we are sinners and we all fall short of the glory of God. And we need to be protective of that.
Yeah. No, 100% agree with that. I think that there's like this unspoken like 11th commandment of thou shalt be nice, but
Thou shalt not be nice.
like we think everything has to be about like not hurting people's feelings. And this isn't saying that like there's a direct calling that you need to abandon your friends. I think you nailed it on the head. It's about prayer and it's about wisdom and knowing like, should I be spending less time with these friends? Doesn't mean you like completely out them and you never talk to them again. But like, I mean, in specific context to this, like this is about cohabitating. Like this would be more about like if you lived with them more than it would even be about like the friends that you hang out with on occasion. Because when you live with them, you see them all the time and what they do and how they live. If you got someone that's, I remember having, roommates that were always clean. They were always cleaning up after themselves. And they were just like super on top of like if anything was left on the counter, they would clean it up, they put it away or whatever. But then when I was in college, I had like 4 roommates that were the absolute worst at cleaning up. They left everything. I kid you not. There was at one point, there was a stack of pizza boxes because they all just ate pizza all the time. There were 6 of us total because it was 3 beds in each room. There was a stack of pizzas, I think about 4 feet tall, that literally touched the ceiling. Because they thought it was a joke. They thought it was funny. They were like, we're just going to keep stacking pizzas until we hit the ceiling. Then we'll take them out. And I'm like, our place looks like a dump right now. Like, this is ridiculous. But like, it was starting to influence my like cleanliness and how often I cleaned. And I was starting to like care less about stuff and not clean things up and just leave them because I just became so used to it over and over again. I just became numb to the way that they lived, and then eventually started to influence what I was doing. And so I would even say that, that specific conversation of like choosing to like leave those people, and specifically in the context of this, is like more about like if you're actually living with those people. But if it's also friends, even more, it's like you said perfectly, if they're more of an influence on you than you are on them, you have to be really careful, because if you're going to become more like your friends, the whole, like show me your friends, I'll show you your future thing, like it's so true.
Dude, you saying this actually brought up something that's in this passage, and I'm excited to dive into this. So talking about like what I'm hearing right now is things are caught.
Yeah.
When you're hanging around somebody, like if you have a mentor and you're hanging out with them, even an hour with your mentor, and you're going to be on fire,
right? And
you're going to feel like, man, I'm going to be the best business person on the planet. Like I'm going to start 10 businesses. So there's a tribe, Dan, and they go in and they try to get their territory. And I'm going to try to find this verse real quick so that we're all on the same page. This is awkward. Okay, found it. All right. So verse 34, the Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the plain. So Dan is one of the tribes, one of the 12 tribes. And if you know anything about the tribes, it's a baker's dozen. It's 13. So Joseph had 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and they both became a tribe. So there's technically 13 tribes. Mm-hmm. And so Dan is, when you read the text, you find out that Dan is actually the only tribe that didn't get to go into the land that they were promised. They were actually pushed out by the Amorites. And they ended up living into the hill country, basically in caves. We find out that they're living in a cave, isolated, alone, on their own.
Tough.
And if you fast forward, so in the very end of Judges, we're going to get to it, so I don't want to talk about that for like takeaway purposes, because we're going to talk about it and then it'll just be repetitive. But they end up causing the whole nation of Israel to fall into idolatry. So they come out of caves later on. They're like these hillbilly, these like hills have eyes cave boys, and they come up and wreak havoc, and they cause the whole nation to stumble into idolatry, and it ends so bad, so poorly.
Yeah.
And but I'm going to read from Revelation. It's chapter 7, verse 5 through 8. I'm not going to read it word for word, but it goes through the 12 tribes. And what you read in there is 12 tribes. And like I said earlier, there's 13.
Hmm.
And if you look at in Revelation, Dan is actually completely omitted from this promise of the 12 tribes. And I think it stems from this very beginning part where they're the only tribe that was isolated and they didn't even get to be partially a part of the promised land. They were on their own. They were in a cave.
Wow.
And I think that just goes, there's two parts to this. I think that if your only friends and only source of influence are people that aren't believers, you're kind of like the tribe of Dan, because like they still, like the other tribes kind of still had each other, even though they were like off. But also if you have no influence, like you're isolated, you're on your own, you're listening to this podcast right now, you're not plugged into a church, you're not plugged into a Bible study, you're not plugged into people that you see like face to face.
Yeah.
You're going to get to a point where you're twisted.
Yeah.
Like you're a little twisted. And when you're on your own, you don't have someone checking on you and like saying like, hey, how are you doing? And let's be real, when you're isolated and you're on your own, you can go down that rabbit trail in your head of depression, anxiety. You feel like everyone's out against you. You feel like God's against you. And so whoever's listening right now, I feel like one of the biggest takeaways from this is one, like you got to own your sin. Like you can't let it spread like the weeds in Remy's yard. They're terrible. You can't let them have
Home
roots.
Depot, man.
Home Depot. But number two, you need community. Like you need godly people who are influencing you. Like the people you're around, you're going to catch their habits. You're going to catch the way that they talk. You're going to catch the way that they treat their wives and their friends. And so like, what are you wanting to be influenced by? And not only that, if you're alone, you need to get plugged into a community. You need to.
Amen to that, brother. You can't leave a legacy alone.
That's true.
I mean, think about it.
True.
I mean, each of the tribes was leaving a legacy. They were still a part of the history, but like Dan was forgotten about. Like that's just the truth of it. Like if you isolate yourself and put yourself away, like you're going to be forgotten. And it's not about like our glory and like what we bring in the end to our own name. But at the same time, like you see the end result of what happens to you, and that pushes you away from everybody else. And so many people today, gosh, it is. And this is like personally, like part of my testimony too. It's just this idea of like individualism, like independence. You don't need anybody else. You don't need to wait for that friend. You don't need to like have that group of people. You can do life on your own and you're fine. You can kill it by yourself. And it's so destructive. Like it destroys the beautiful creation of the church that like Jesus literally set before us to have and said like, this is the best thing for you is to like have a church, to have a community. And it doesn't have to be under a building. It doesn't have to be under that big giant cross that's standing outside of that giant church. Like it's about community and it's about being plugged in. Like Jesus didn't do his ministry on his own. He had 12 disciples with him. And you read anywhere else in scripture, like no one stays isolated. And if they do, it doesn't end well for them. And so,
well, to that point, like we can even end it on this, like Moses poured into Joshua.
Yeah.
Joshua, you read, wasn't really pouring into anybody. And there was no leader after Joshua, and God had to raise judges after. So it's like the same thing too. Like you need to pour into the next generation, because if you're not pouring into your kids, if you're not pouring into your friends, if you're not pouring into somebody and like leaving that legacy that you're talking about, who's going to continue it on?
Yeah.
Like who's going to be creating Christians like later on, or who's going to be bold in their faith later on if you're not stepping up? And so like, let's be real, like Joshua kind of failed. Like he dropped the ball. Like he was supposed to lead the people into the promised land and like get them going, and he kind of didn't.
Yeah.
So,
dude, that's so true. We don't really think about pouring into like the next generation. We're really just focused on pouring into ourselves. So like, but for someone that's young, like us, like I feel like I battle the temptation, or not the temptation, but I battle the thought process of, but I'm young. Like, how can I pour into other people when I'm so young? I feel like I have so much to learn. I'm not there yet. What do you say to someone who says that?
Baloney. So like, so Samuel, he was basically the last judge.
Yeah.
He was the first prophet, right after the book of Judges. And when he started going into the ministry, he was crazy young. And like people say that when he took over, he was like 17 years old when Eli died and passed away. Like there's obviously timetables are different for everybody, but he died when he was 52. and he raised 2 different kings, and he was a prophet and all this different stuff. So like, if you think about it in the lifespan, like my dad's well over 52. So he was young and he did things, and he was prophetic. Like he had a prophetic word when he was a teenager. When we think about a prophet, we think about these like old gray beard mans.
Yeah.
Like, no, God speaks to you. He speaks to me, and we can be on fire. And like, it's the same thing that when Paul was speaking to Timothy, he was like, no, like,
Do not let them look down on you. Yep.
don't like,
Set an
don't do
example in
it. Like,
speech and conduct.
exactly. And like, it goes back to what we were saying in the very beginning. It's a hard issue. If you feel like you're young and that you can't do it and that God can't use you because you're young, like, stop it.
Yeah.
He can use you. He can use anybody, and he wants to use you. So like, get on the train today.
Boom. Boom. That's it right there, bro. That was not a short episode.
15, 20 minutes.
Yeah. We'll get better at this, right, guys?
Hey,
There's so much good stuff.
so much good stuff.
So much good stuff.
Low key, I like we said at the very beginning, the very first episode,
Yeah.
we want you to be a part of this. So if you have takeaways or if you have questions, please comment, please post, message us on Instagram, whatever it is, that whatever platform. And we're going to like name drop you guys, like, hey, so-and-so messaged this in and we totally missed this from the text, and they're right. And like, this is awesome. So be a part. This is our Bible study. This is our devotional, and we want you to be a part. And so we hope you guys enjoyed, and we cannot wait to see you in the next podcast.
Heck yeah, brother. Thank you guys so much for joining. If you guys aren't following us on social media already, check us out over at Ask Us Why with 2 Ys. You can support us. The best way to support us is through our Where page, Ask Us Where, or head to our shop directly on the web, askuswhyshop.com. You can check out all the cool stuff that we're dropping. We got new posters, we got new stickers, new shirts coming, all the great things. But other than that, we love you guys, and we will catch you guys in the next episode. See you guys on Friday.